Starting my rebuttal in 3, 2, 1. Madam Speakers, panels of educators, and my peers from the affirmative bench, the proposition comes to the House today with a noble goal ensuring that middle-income Indonesian students do not drop out of higher education. But their solution is a wolf in sheep's clothing. They want to introduce a state-backed, debt-driven culture into a fragile economic landscape and tie our youth into mandatory labor bonds. The core thesis of the negative side today is actually quite simple. The education is a social mobility tool, not a financial trap. By shifting the funding burden into student debt, the proposition does not open doors. They simply charge students with a massive fee for walking through them. We believe the state has a duty to directly fund accessibility rather than forcing 18-year-olds to bet their financial futures on a saturated job market. Let's look directly at their case. So firstly, they point to Singapore as their shining model. They say, look, Singapore does it and it works. Panels, this is a massive comparative flaw. Singapore is a hyper-developed, centralized, high GDP city-state with an economy structurally designed for immediate professional absorption. Meanwhile, Indonesia is a sprawling developing nation where the informal economy accounts for over 55% of employment. You cannot copy-paste a policy from a global financial hub into a developing market and expect the same results. Secondly, they claim that the system protects the middle class from dropping out. But look closely at their mechanism. They say the loan is quote-unquote income contingent, meaning you only pay it back once when you get a job that pays enough. What happens when a graduate takes a low-paying or informal job just to survive? They aren't paying back the loan. The government debt pool grows and the fiscal deficit widens, and the entire system collapses under its own uncollectible weight. Third, on the issue regarding brain drain and their work bonds, the proposition argues that forcing students to stay and work in Indonesia for a set number of years secures a domestic human resources. Panel, forced retention creates an unmotivated, resentful workforce. If our domestic market cannot offer competitive wages, forcing a tech graduate to stay in Indonesia under a legal threat doesn't create innovation. It creates a brain drain bottleneck. The true elites will simply have foreign companies buy out their bonds while the middle class remains legally trapped. This brings us to the first major area of clash in today's debate, the economic viability of state-backed student debt. The proposition assumes a perfect world where a university degree automatically guarantees a high-paid job. But let's look at the reality of Indonesia's current job market. We face severe youth underdeployment and a massive gap between that. We can see a massive gap between what universities teach and what industries actually need. When you inject thousands and thousands of debt-saddled graduates into a market that cannot absorb them, you will quite literally create a crisis. Under the proposition's model, the government eventually becomes a predatory debt collector. Even if the loan is income contingent, the looming shadow of debt prevents young adults from taking risks, like starting a business or maybe buying a house or supporting their families in general. The affirmative spoke about a student whose father fell ill. In their world, that student is now legally bonded into a state debt and a work bond, giving them zero flexibility to adapt to family emergencies. Under our side, we do not saddle that vulnerable student with a legal liability before they even earn their first paycheck. The second major clash is who actually bears the burden of education. The proposition argues that middle class is currently ignored because scholarship targets the ultra poor. We agree that middle class needs help, but their version of help is telling the middle class, here, take thousands of dollars of debt and give up your freedom of movement for the next 5 to 10 years. This fundamentally alters the purpose of higher education. University stops being an institution of the intellectual and national growth and becomes a strict financial transaction. Students will stop choosing majors that actually matters, like social work, teaching, or local arts, and will be forced to choose only high-paying corporate majors just to escape their debt cycle. And what is the negative alternative? The government budget is finite. Instead of building a massive, expensive, bureaucratic nightmare to track audit or maybe legally enforce student loans across 17,000 islands, the government should invest that exact same capital into directly subsidizing public university tuition fees, known as UKT. By lowering the base cost of our education, the middle class, structurally, we solve the dropout problem without creating a generation of in-debt youth. We keep the education public. We keep the education affordable and free of corporate anxiety. Panels, the affirmative wants to solve a financial problem by creating a lifetime financial burden for the very student that they claim to protect. They offer a mechanism that fails economic reality of Indonesia, trapped in the middle class, in debt, and restricts their freedom without any mandatory bonds. We believe in an Indonesia where our youth can work freely, creatively, and continue to contribute to the nation out of passion and opportunity, not out of legal coercion to the state loan. For these specific reasons, the opposition case stands firm. Thank you. I beg to oppose.